Welcome back. Well, yes, those two gentlemen, as you've seen there, are with us this morning to shed some light on electricity tariff. Well, the adjective to qualify what transpired, perhaps they'll give it to us. But yes, indeed, Joe Ajero is Deputy President of Nigeria Labour Congress. He's also the General Secretary, National Union of Electricity Employees. That's the NUEE, joining us from Owerri. Then you also have Mr. George Itomi, who is a director with ECO Disco and also a legal practitioner. Gentlemen, good morning and thank you for joining us today.
Good morning.
Good morning, Chamberlain.
Yeah, so yesterday there was that information out there, be hazy, people scrambling to find out what is the true position. Eventually, the NERC responded saying, no, it wasn't, there isn't any such increase to the tune of 50%. But their statement, they unequivocally say no approval has been granted for 50% tariff increase. But then you equally see saying, on the contrary, the tariff for customers on service bands D and E, those are customers being served less than an average of 12 hours of supply per day for a period of 1 month, remains frozen and subsidized in line with the policy direction of the federal government. But in compliance with the Electric Power Sector Reforms Act, and the nation's tariff methodology for biannual review, the rates for service bands A, B, C, D, and E have been adjusted by 2 Naira to 4 Naira per kilowatt to reflect the partial impact of inflation and movements in foreign exchange rates. Well, Mr. Ajero, your union should have some information about some of these matters. Well, they say, look, we're just relying on the law. So does this assuage any frayed nerves who thought it was 50% initially?
Well, I want to say clearly that if I were in the shoes of NERC, I wouldn't have issued that statement. That statement was very contradictory and was not able to address the issues at hand. In the same vein, any government that goes into an agreement with the electricity operators based on changes in inflation and the valuation of the currency, it doesn't know its onions. These are external variables that are not constant, that changes every day. So every moment it changes, the electricity operators will tell you they have increased tariff. There was a tariff increase by November, which is being contested. A committee was set up, headed by Kiamon, and some of us are serving in that committee. We have not even finished addressing that issue, and that adjustment was unjust, it wasn't necessary. Now somebody is issuing a statement that there was an adjustment, it wasn't an increase. No matter how they play with semantics, Nigerians are noticing a lot of difference in what they are paying. And let me say this, I stand to be corrected. 90% of Nigerians receive less than 12 hours a day. I repeat, all those issues of banding, band A, B, C, and you say they are the people affected, D and E, you say they were not affected. I think those are all lies. Nigerians know more than this. And they have an agreement with Labour. On all these issues, the committee has not even submitted their work. They are still functioning, they are still working. And NERC, behaves as if they are from the moon and they are insensitive to what is happening in the country. That is unacceptable. And I think that's not how to make money. Yeah, that's the position of Labour as at this moment, and it had to be clear. Whether they call it adjustment or increment, or you increase in 3 bands, and you say you didn't increase in 1 band, and you attach it to a certain performance level, which has not been met. I've been in Owerri for over 2 weeks now, and I stay in a place that they say may be in band A, B, or C. The highest I got has been 3 hours. So I don't know what I said.
Well, Mr. Tommy, quite a number of issues that he raised there. First, suggesting the basis upon which they entered into negotiation. So if you're going to keep adjusting that based on inflation, and then contempt for the process regarding the contestations that is going on for the previous increase before coming up with this one. So what do you think of that?
Thank you, Chamberlain. I think the starting point for discussions like this will always be helpful if we know what the law requires. Nothing exists in a vacuum. NERC operates within the law, and it is obliged under the law to make a tariff review, minor tariff reviews twice a year, and then a major tariff review every 5 years. And so many things go into this review, which is usually captured under the multi-year tariff order. It takes into consideration all the cost components that go towards electricity tariffs. So if we look at things like the cost of gas, cost of generation, inflation, and forex, you can't run away from these. These are realities. It doesn't have to be electricity. Any other commodity is subject to these vagaries, and adjustments are made accordingly. So from a legal point of view, NERC is obliged to do that, and this is what they have done. But in terms of how all these convert to an actual increase, I think it's been misrepresented the way it's been given, and you only need to look at the numbers. The tariffs have remained the same for bands D and E. They are frozen across the board, and over 55% of our consumers belong to this group, and I'll come back later to why it remains that way. But for bands A, B, and C, and just to refresh your memory, band A are those who consume electricity of 20 hours and above, averaging over a 2-month period. Band B would be those who get 16 and above, and then band C, 12 and above. D, 8 and above, E, 4 and above. So that's the way the bands have been separated. And the reason this has been done so is that the discos are then expected to generate revenue based on the service they can provide within these band limits. That is why it is a service reflective tariff. So now, when these tariffs were announced in September, Labour kicked, and not just that, everybody across the board, because it was considered a huge jump. So they went into negotiations, and I believe all the negotiation is still ongoing. But some things were agreed in the interim. For example, the federal government agreed to give up the VAT element, which should be used to subsidize bands A, B, and C. A tariff freeze was already agreed for bands D and E. And that VAT reprieve reflected in a tariff reductions from bands A, B, and C. Now, what has happened is now that we now have another tariff review to be done as required by law, they've looked at the variables that have come in as a result of the impact of inflation and forex, and have come with an adjustment that has seen a marginal increase of between 2 and 4 naira across the bands. So this is certainly nowhere close to the 50% you're talking about. And like I told you, this thing must happen. As we speak, there is an overall resetting of the entire Nigerian electricity industry that's taking place, and discussions have been going on for the past few months. The whole idea is that you must make the industry reflective of the reality so that you can get the required investments. And these, I believe, the discussions are going in the right directions. All the protests, all the disagreements are also being taken into consideration, and nothing has been done to move away from all that has been agreed. But it still is incumbent on NERC as the regulator to do what the law expects it to do. Now, the impact is what we should be looking at, and it will be easy for people to see from January that impact in their tariffs. It will not be significant. As I've told you, it's an adjustment of between 2 and 4 naira across the tariff band to simply take care of only 2 components in this MITO mix, which is in this case is inflation and forex. We all know that that has to be done, and that's why I said it doesn't have to be electricity. Any other commodity that's subject to these vagaries suffer the same thing.
Well, the thing is, once there's an increase or adjustment, so at whichever percentage, and people notice it, they always think this has happened again. But when you say they're relying on the law, Mr. Ajero was talking about the fact that there's already a conversation, the contestation of the previous one, which is being, they're still discussing it. So they felt coming up with this one leaves a sour taste. Does that then mean that since there is law regarding mandating them to do that biannually, whatever decisions happen there may be immaterial as a result of the laws that they have to comply with?
No, I'm not saying that at all. Far from that. What I'm just saying is that there's one thing when the law obligates you to do that you must do. The impact can be negotiated. I mean, we are a country of laws, and everything we do is predicated on what the law requires you to do. And they're not the only regulator. There are so many other regulators across various sectors of the economy. These regulators do what they need to do, especially when it impacts on prices. Now, when those adjustments are done, you can look at the impact, and then you can decide that the impact is very high on the very vulnerable category. And in this case, in the electricity industry, it's been identified as the bands D and E. They are considered the most vulnerable, and therefore the subsidy element contained, which is also inherent in the law, is being given to their benefit. And people should understand that that is really what is going on. Now, one of the major contestations and one of the reasons it's been like this is that metering is a big issue, especially for those in bands D and E. And also, as a consequence of these negotiations that are going on, a mass metering rollout program has commenced, and nothing significant will happen to bands D and E until this mass metering is effected, because the heart of this business is the metering, because that's what reduces the conflict between what I consumed and what I'm expected to pay. So NERC, the discos, the federal government, everybody's alive to that responsibility. And trust me, there is a lot going on with regard to metering. It's going to be a sustained program over a period of time. And once we achieve that, the parity that we're looking at in the metering rollout, then adjustments can take place. I'll tell you something. In Eco-Disco,
just one moment on that issue. Just one moment. There is so much to talk about, so much to unpack in all that you have said. Ultimately, it is the experience of the consumer that really determines, whether all of these wonderful things that you're saying really is as impactful as this. But let's go to Mr. Ajero. The angle that he spoke about, that Mr. Itome spoke about, Mr. Ajero, is that it is the law. The law says that there should be adjustment twice every year and a major adjustment once in 5 years. And according to him, this is what is happening now. It's just following the law. How do you respond to that?
Well, I think people find a way of hiding under the law to create all manner of havoc on fellow Nigerians. Let me say clearly, in this country, we have learned to grapple with bad laws. And I say this without mincing words. Bad laws are always disobeyed. In this country, there is a law that even criminalizes strike in this country. Such laws are always disobeyed. In this country, at a stage under Abacha, there was a law that says any tanker driver that goes on strike will be executed. such laws were never implemented and they cannot be implemented. Now, this law that says that there will be increase 2 times every year on electricity, whether there was service or not, that law definitely will be put to test. I want you to tell him that all those issues and polemics about laws, that we have lived with them before now. That law that says if there is something that happens with foreign exchange in the black market or whatever, you punish Nigerians. If there's inflation, you punish Nigerians. And he has not been able to address the issue of service and the issue of where it concerns him, whether electricity being generated in a green or Afam or Uheli are being imported into this country. He has never been able to tell us whether gas being generated in Delta, in Rivers, or in Bayelsa are imported. He has not been able to address the issue that gas generated in those areas are being dollarized. They have first of all put the price of gas here on dollar and then charge Nigerians. Such things are not provided by the law. It's not the law that told them to do all those things. So to that extent, his quote about law, his reference about law, this is the law versus the people. This is the law of oppression versus the people who must be liberated against this obnoxious policy. You saw him speaking like the NERC and the Regulatory Commission. And I've said it earlier before that wherever the operator and the Regulatory Commission are united, wherever you have regulatory hijack by the operators, that the country will always suffer. Now, in the NERC, who represents the ordinary man, who speaks for them? NERC is always being manipulated by the operators to do their own bidding, and that is what we are seeing. And as Nigerians, as representatives of mass-based organizations, we are saying it doesn't work, and it will not work. And he say the law is going to work. So we're going to test the ground and knows who is paying. And let me repeat this. The issue of, banding. There was no Nigerian that was there when they banded. There was no Nigerian that was there when they say this area belongs to Band A, Band B, or Band C. Nobody. So it's what they tell us. They will tell us that this area is Band A, this area is Band B, and it's quoting 55% of people being on Band B. Where is the statistics? Who and who did this delineation to enable who belongs to which band? Who gets 4 hours and who gets 3 hours? I think the whole process has been met with irregularities and must be readdressed. To a very large extent, that was what we are trying to address. And the federal government said they are providing 6 million meters, especially with the issue of estimated billing. And up to now, 500,000 meters have not been provided. And I'm saying this because I'm a member of the committee, and we have not addressed this issue. And you can't, even if there is a law and there is a stalemate and people are negotiating, you don't go ahead to say what can you do and continue what you are doing. It is not done. That is not the law.
Well, Mr. Tomi, one of the questions anyone would ask is what he has also asked. What element of the value chain is dollarized and consequently subjected to the vagaries of increase or variance in the price of the naira against the dollar, for which, reason this adjustment has been made?
I'm glad you asked that question. Yes, you have gas as a country, you have oil as a country, you have telecoms as a country, but these are, before they are turned to value, investments have to be made. These investments are made in many cases by international companies. The investments come in foreign exchange. The payback consequently is in foreign exchange. So this is why these investments, the calculations are benchmarked against foreign exchange. We had the same challenge with the telecom sector, and investments that came from abroad. The repayments are in dollars, and these monies adjustments are made for these dollars to be made available for them to be paid. This is the way investments work. People make investments. There must be certainty in the law Otherwise, nobody will come here. We're not going to drink our oil or smoke our gas. We've got to work it for the benefit of the people. Yes, we lost time, and I sympathize with the argument by fellow Nigerians that we lost time because for so long, we subsidized things we should not have subsidized, especially when we had enough income support not to do it. It is more pronounced now because between the twin whammy of COVID and the collapse in oil prices, the federal government simply can no longer carry this burden, which is why it is coming in the shock manner in which it is coming. And to suggest that the regulator is in cahoots with the operator, I don't believe Mr. Jerry himself believes that. You are witnesses to how far we've gone back and forth with the regulator over these issues. We have always insisted as investors that the climate must be friendly for investments. People are putting hard-earned money and should get the money back. What we need is a bit of patience, and we need that patience. This is the same country where in telecoms, it took us ages. How much did it cost you a SIM card? 50,000, 200,000? But today they are begging you to come and take SIM cards. If the regulator had interrupted the process, we would not have gotten here. Look at our banks today. People lined up in those good old days with tally numbers to withdraw their money. But today, look at the sophistication that has greeted the banking sector. This is the power of investment. What we just require is the patience to go along this journey. It's coming a little late with the power sector, but we don't really have a choice at this point. It must happen.
Just a quick one, Mr. Tommy. He equally spoke about the basis upon which they came to the banding of different areas. So, and then he wanted to know about how you, or is it the discourse, arrived at that start to say 50% of these people are under this band?
It's very easy. Look, first of all, you must trust the regulator. There are experts who do these things. These things are not just plucked from the air. When they were doing the banding for the purpose of service reflective tariffs, and this is the emphasis on service reflective tariffs. In other words, the consumer is not expected to pay for service he has not received. Now, what has happened is that they've done a banding according to the category of consumers who are willing to pay for a certain amount of money for the service they receive in a particular area, and your type of consumption. And based upon that statistics, the banding was made. So if you're in band A, for example, you're expected to receive no less than 20 hours a day, average over a 2-month period. If you receive less than that, you're entitled not to pay, or you're entitled to get some sort of compensation from the disco. If you do not move towards a contract-based market, people will not be held to their obligations under any contract. So, and the subsidy regime, if you ask me, always distorts this. We are moving towards a contract-based market, and everybody will be held responsible. I will tell you something. When this service reflective tariff was introduced, the discos told NERC, we must also be able to get compensation, say from the transmission company, if we can prove that our inability to meet a customer's requirements was not our own fault, but perhaps fault of the transmission company. And they agreed. We have now signed service levels agreements with TCN. So what is going on is a full alignment with the value chain. And I just plead that we should be patient to let this process work itself out.
We'll talk about that in a bit. Just hang on. We'll go to break. But when we return, we'll get Mr. Ajiro's response to some of the issues you've just spoken to. That will be in a moment. Do stay with us. Okay, we'll get to Mr. Ajiro soon to get his response. Having listened to the explanation from Mr. Tommy about the methodology with which they adopted and how they arrived at some of those stats. But Mr. Tommy, when you say or talk about patience for Nigerians, now, first is, could you explain why is it that why did they have to stipulate or put in there that the adjustment have got to be done twice a year and not once a year?
Well, it's again, it's the law. What you do with a law is from time to time you can amend it, but the law as we found it when it was conceived for this, when it was conceived for the sector to move gradually towards being unbundled, if you recall, to attract private sector investment, it was agreed that things like inflation, those indices that affect prices, 6 months would be a good time to average them and make adjustments accordingly. That was why they arrived at that decision. And like I said, it's not peculiar to the electricity market alone. It's across any goods and services generally. You make these adjustments as you go on. Now, I use the word adjustments. Mr. Ajero was saying that price increase. It's an adjustment.
Okay, but Mr. Tommy, that's lots of arguments about that particular area as well, because people say all we have seen about this adjustment has always been upward. What about it going downward?
Yes. No, it's you see, as I told you, upon the inception of privatization, if these things had been done, the shock to the system would not be as much as it is today. If you recall, the discourse kept screaming that the privatization was predicated on cost-reflective tariffs. I'm sure you recall that. So from the get-go, 7 years ago, these adjustments should have been done. But for reasons best known, they were not done. And it was not until COVID and collapse in oil prices that the government realized they could not carry the burden any longer. It is the withdrawal from that Father Christmas position that has forced this increase to come the way it has come. If it had been allowed, just like we saw with telecoms, I keep giving you that example, it would have been seamless, because the idea behind any price increase is to encourage investments. Investments in turn will increase, will translate to better service. Better service will increase to more economic activity. Then the citizenry is empowered and therefore capable to pay. This is the way economic rules work.
It's interesting. One moment. It's interesting that you cite the example of what's happening in the telecoms industry at this point, because many times when we try to compare what's happening in the telecom sector with what's happening in the power sector, people say it's different. And now you are saying it's the same. And consequently, the kind of adjustments that we have, the kind of situations that we're having on our hands right now. Because if we're going to compare what's happening in the telecom sector with what is happening in the power sector, trust me, you would have to, I would have to buy my meters and take it with me wherever I go. But it's different in this case, because if I use a meter in a particular place, the word on the street that you have, the people in your sector have been made available to us, have made available to us, is that if I buy a meter here in this particular place where I'm living right now, and I have to move, I can't take it with me. I pay for it, but I can't take it with me. So please explain that one in relation to the example that you're giving.
Sheyi, let me explain to you.
Ayo, please.
The economic principles. Sorry, Kyle, I'm so sorry. The economic principles I'm talking about. The principle of non-interference with economic principles by the regulator to attract investments. The vagaries of what happens varies from industry to industry. Yes, you can buy your phone. By the way, there was a time you couldn't buy your phone when in the Nitel days, you had to get your phone from Nitel. Go and find out. But one of the consequences of freeing up that sector was to give this freedom you're talking about. But you can do that with telecoms. You can't do that with meters, because electricity is a very it's dangerous. You cannot allow people to take meters from one point to another because the technicality that involves moving meters, installing them, the safety element is very key, which is why you cannot move around.
In that wise, Mr. Itomi, in that wise, Mr. Itomi,
what I'm saying is that
in one moment, in that wise, then the meters ought to be provided for me where I am living so that I just pay for the service. That's the way it ought to be. But that's not what is happening in this regard. And that's why many people are wondering what exactly is happening. Plus, they also have to live with this yearly increase, twice yearly increase, and once in 5 years major increase.
Please, adjustments. Don't use the word increase.
Until we have, Mr. Itomi, until we have a downward increase, until we have a downward review, it is an increase. It's been an increase all the while.
No, you've had downward reviews. They were not wise, but you've had downward reviews in the sector.
When was
the reason what I'm driving out is that many of the things we're doing should have been done so long ago. That's why I said the best time to do something was 5 years ago. The next best time is today. But the results will not be as automatic as you expect. The metering problem, which is at the heart of the electricity industry, thanks to the insistence of all the stakeholders, the rollout has commenced and it will go. During that period, the protected bands will not suffer. Anybody who does not get a meter will not suffer. The whole idea is to phase out estimated billings, and this is what we're going. There's a methodology that exists today that has been agreed upon. Nothing will happen to that methodology until everybody is metered, and we reduce this argument over what I consumed or what I didn't consume. It will take time, but that is what is happening. All the agreements reached will be respected. We want it too, because we had been advocating and clamoring for this. Metering itself was a function of the tariff. Because you couldn't do anything about the tariff, nobody was ready to invest in meters. But today, with the combination of the involvement of the central bank, the World Bank, now Siemens, there is funding available for meters. So the meter rollout is going to be as sure as anything you can imagine. And we expect that this will be done rapidly and as quickly as possible. But you cannot sacrifice quality on the altar of speed. It takes time to manufacture, it takes time to calibrate, it takes time to install. You must do all this to the highest safety standards so that you don't create problems for the consumer. Those delays will necessarily happen, but trust me, the meter rollout program is well on the way.
Because that people who still ask us, even though I'm going to go to Ms. Ajero soon, they still talk about the CAPME scheme because they say their money has been trapped. They paid all that money. Now they don't have the meter. They don't have their monies back. So they wonder how all of this is on track. But we'll come to that in a bit. Ms. Ajero, I don't know how much of Mr. Tome's response you got about the methodology, how they arrived at the banding of people and then the percentages of people who are in bands A, B, C, D, and E. In addition to your further response, could you respond to that? Mute yourself, please, Ms. Ajero. You may need to just unmute because we can't hear you.
I was totally lost when he was giving this, because any examination, any process that is not transparent, any test that is not transparent cannot be valid and cannot be acceptable. Now, they are the people, they conducted tests, they conducted interview on people, they examined them, they marked, and they allocated marks to them. He was talking about investment, and Nigerians being patient. Ask him how many years Nigerians will be patient. This year is the 8th year that privatization took place. and he's still calling for patience. This year is the 8th year privatization took place, and he's talking of investment. Please ask him where he has invested in the last 8 years, anywhere. Because the cheapest investment in the power sector is meter. Meter. Find out why they have not even invested in metering, in getting meter for people. And meter is a measure for them to do their business, measure of assessment. Every filling station has a meter. Every seller of garri has a cup or rice cup. Now, in the power sector, he's telling you that they have a lot of investment for a sector that was given to them almost free of charge, a sector that was given to them at about 400 billion. And over 1.7 trillion has been given to them to perform, and they have not performed. I think this thing is so nauseating when they come up with this argument all over the world. And he's telling you that we have an unending band to increase tariff every 2 years, every inflation, every devaluation of the currency, they increase. That has never happened that way. And he's saying that is what happens in other sectors. I don't know whether the ones selling coke are doing that way. I don't know how many times MTN and others are doing that way. And they feed us with all this information because they're in the power sector. Ask him, from 4,000 megawatts that they inherited, how many megawatts do we have today that they have now invested, that Nigerians must be taxed to death? This is increase, whether he calls it increase or adjustment, too many. And they are no longer bearable for Nigerians. And I'm saying this without mincing words. I don't want to go into the concept of privatization or not, because my position is known. But we're now looking at the after effects. Ask him whether it is not under the law and whether they didn't have a memorandum of understanding with the federal government that this whole process will be reviewed after 5 years. Ask him why that law has not been obeyed. And he's still talking of the law agreement. Ask him whether part of the reasons why the sector was not privatized was not foreign direct investment. Ask him how much investment has entered into this country. Because he's talking about law, talking about rules and regulations, so much. Ask him why the first point of call must be tariff increase. And find out if he's talking of service reflective tariff. Is he the person to measure it? After the increase in November, have they done even a statistics to know the satisfaction of Nigerians? Ask him why they have taken Nigerians to use non-performance as index for them to operate in the power sector. Now you are looking at the least people that get power supply, the people that get 12 hours, the people that get 16 hours. That is non-performance. Every subscriber to electricity wants to get 24 hours power supply. Now, why are you measuring them based on 4 hours and 8 hours? If it's not because you are non-performance, should that be the case? In all countries of the world, are we supposed to measure performance based on 2 hours, 3 hours, and then they give you what you are going to pay? Every Nigerian should get 24 hours power supply. That's the fact everywhere in this world. So why is their own measure based on non-performance? 4 hours, 6 hours, and Nigerians have followed them on that level of categorization of non-performance. So I don't want to keep on talking, and you listen to Festus Keyamo, how we are working, the discourse we are represented in that committee. Up to this moment, we have not completed our work, and he's trying to deny, the issue of a regulatory hijack. From the onset, we want that when the regulatory agency is hijacked, this is what we are going to see. The regulatory agency is supposed to be on the side of the people. It has to be involved in consumer protection, but they have not done that. And it equally has to emphasize on efficiency. They don't even have staff. In every state of the federation, I'm not sure that you have, one NERC or more staff who checks what is happening. In the issue of metering, you don't have staff that even measure how they adjust their meters, because in most cases, what you see is more than meets the eye. And somebody will come and as an operator to defend NERC. I was thinking that somebody from NERC should come out and do this justification and tell us whether he lives in the moon. We can't have a situation whereby you must adjust based on what is happening in dollar or inflation. Those ones are not under the control of Nigerians. They are under the control of the state. And remember, the federal government still controls 40% in the distribution companies. Ask them how much profit they have declared for the federal government between that time and now, because they're talking of performance.
Okay,
but they unilaterally increase.
That last part, it's almost, there were the additional perspectives on that last bit. But Mr. Tommy, you heard him. So do you want to respond to them?
Well, I don't know where I'm supposed to start from. I don't think if you regulate a product that costs a certain amount, say 50 naira, and by regulation you should sell it for 30, and then you don't tell the investor where the 20 naira will come from, that you'll be talking, what profit are you talking about, and who's going to give profit on a loss-making business? So there were so many things that were wrong with the implementation of the privatization. The principle wasn't wrong, and that's why I keep going back to successful privatizations. The banking sector was moribund, it was privatized, there was patience, it succeeded. We've done it with telecoms, partially with the aviation industry, and as a country, we must begin to move away from this concept of this is for us, we must take it at whatever cost, not minding the fact that the subsidies is bringing increased pressure on all our earnings. We can't continue like this. You must create investment-friendly atmosphere. Nobody will bring in any FDI. He's asking why FDI did not come. FDI did not come. Ask them. BP did a road show. Why didn't anybody come? And why are you now blaming Nigerians who have put their money in the sector? Is that the way to pay them back? We are all in this together. We must make this country work. Sitting back and saying no is not the answer. What we need to do is we'll start. When there are hiccups, we'll address them. And this is what I believe these committees are doing. Nobody, again, if this is all brought by the misconceived notion that there has been a 50% increase in tariff, it is not true. So the discussions go on, let us continue, and we'll begin to make all this progress. There's been so much progress made in the last 3 or 4 months, and we'll continue along those trajectory. And I appeal to Mr. Ajero, Labour, and all stakeholders to let's keep up that momentum so that way we can actually liberate this sector. For us Nigerians, we're not going to get angels from anywhere to come and do it. We've done it. There's really no point tearing at each other and doing as if somebody has just come to take what doesn't belong to them. I mean, none of these investors have recovered a dime since they came in. It's been a tortuous business because of the distortions we've had in the market. And it's not the first time we've cried out against it. But now that we are on the trajectory to correct the mistakes, I just plead that we should remain so for the benefit of everyone. We will overcome this. Challenges are meant to be met, and we will meet it.
The last part of what he said was about government's 40% stake. So is there subsidy in the industry? Or is government still subsidizing as well?
How can? I've always said this, there's a subsidy element, I've told you, and it's being given to the benefit of banks, D and E. Those are the most vulnerable consumer category. But what I'm saying is that when you say the government put 1.7 trillion, there's a value chain. There's a value chain that starts with gas, generation, transmission, and distribution. It didn't go to the distribution companies. Don't create the impression. If you are saying, why should the government privatize a sector and still subsidize it? Not all the members of the value chain were subsidized. TCN is still a wholly owned government, and they must take care of it. Gas is a runaway cost. 60% of the cost of electricity is gas. Gas is owned by the government, and they deal with gas producers. Discos have nothing to do with that. And you heard the minister say, what goes into the pricing of gas? We too are interested. Can we make adjustments there because it will impact positively on prices? Yes, the discos will be happy to do that. The discos don't control that. We must understand how the value chain works. But just aggregating numbers and throwing them out is not going to help this situation. I think we should all sit down, and we're already doing so, and methodically dissect this problem. We can do it. We've faced challenges in this country before. We've overcome.
Tomi, I'm pretty sure many Nigerians would, sympathize with the issues that you are raising, and would also want to support as much as they can, because ultimately, just as you said, it is our nation. But people will only say based on the experiences that they have. And if the experiences are not pleasant, they can't fold their arms. They have to say something. For instance, on Twitter, Victor Owo is saying, do discos and gencos review their equipment? For instance, he says there is a transformer inside a Kangba station in Surulere. It was commissioned by Her Majesty the Queen in the late 50s and 60s, yet it is still in use. Let them look into it. And this is one experience. I'm pretty sure if we throw a poll out there, we'll have so many like that. There is also that story, that made the rounds not too long ago of also as a result of this controversy that is ongoing, that the transformers in certain areas are not working, and consequently, some of these people that you talk about in Band D and E that are being subsidized do not even have the power supply because the transformers that will take the power to their homes are not functional. And that is replicated all over the nation. So how do people respond to that?
Kaidi, I'm not denying any of these things that you said. We leave the problem today. But I've told you, this has come from a sector that has been neglected since independence. And we've now taken the decision we should have taken a long time ago. The results will not be rapid. So we are going to deal with it. And even after privatization, they still allowed a lot of these distortions to happen. It is only now we're having meetings in the value chain that's realigning the entire value chain. And many of these, liquidity is a crisis. Once you release that liquidity crisis, the investments will come in. We have repeatedly apologized to consumers in these banks, and we are doing our absolute best, and we will serve them. But to discount the investments made between the discos and the gencos, over $3.4 billion was invested.
All right, let me bring this in.
To wave it aside as if it doesn't matter.
As we wind down on this now, there's been this part which has been talked about repeatedly, but doesn't seem to have been attended to. Performance charter between, the consumers and providers. If I'm supposed to get 12 hours and I pay for that and don't get 12 hours, what happens in that period where I don't get it?
First of all, you have every right to complain to your disco and to NERC. We have encouraged consumers to start logging, and many consumers in the co-disco area are doing so. And you log it. Remember, it's over a period of time. You just average it over a 1 month period if in bands D and E, 2 months if in bands A, B, and C. Log it. And we have many cases in which if they feel they haven't received the service and all, a credit is given against future service. But the most important thing is that we also need to know why. For example, it may not be the disco's fault. It may be transmission constraints.
Well, that would not be for me, consumer, to think about that.
No, I understand. Don't get me wrong. I understand.
Okay.
I understand. But I'm just letting you know how it works. So when you do the complaint, it will be received. Nobody's being protected here. That's why we're making it.
Okay. We need to bring in Ms. Ajero as well. All right, Ms. Ajero, could you go ahead and give us your concluding perspectives?
Well, I think from what I said at the onset, no matter the level of adjustment, whether it calls it adjustment or increase in tariff, it cannot stand the test of time. This is not the time.
All right, gentlemen, that will just give us a minute. We'll need to come back and then just sort that out. That will be in the moment. Please join us again. All right, well, yeah, that is the situation, what's going on with the NIN registration number. But before we go to that, Mr. Ajero, you were going to give your concluding perspectives. Could you go ahead, please?
Okay. I was trying to state that he was equally going back on the issue of privatization or no privatization. We're not going back to that. They are here, they are already working, but in all the indices of performance, they have not met the mark. And they are equally talking about increases in tariff without taking into cognizance the level of inflation in the country, and without them realizing that inflation in the country affects equally the poor, the level of unemployment, the level of inflation, but to them, it's all about cost and profit maximization. And they have blackmailed the federal government to the extent that the federal government has refused to review their contract so much. They have blackmailed the federal government to the extent that the federal government is now trying to provide meters. I've never seen where that happened for them. They have blackmailed the federal government to the extent that federal government is trying to take away VAT as a way of taking care of certain bands. They have blackmailed the federal government to the extent that the federal government is giving them a lot of subvention. And with all this blackmail, you start to wonder what is happening. You start to wonder whether these people are not stronger than the state, because they have always had their ways up to this moment. I think they should be able to perform. And somebody was talking of if somebody was charged more than his band. If you are charged more than your band was stipulated, if it is prepaid meters, it will run, nobody will pay. And the discourse are neglecting the customers and the consumers. There's a nearby community here. They bought a new transformer in EEDC. Under approval of EEDC, they repaired their own transformer at the second one under approval of EEDC. Up to this moment, for 3 weeks, EEDC refused to commission them. And they're in darkness because they're asking for some fund. This incompetence cannot continue. And the Nigerians are at their mercy today. That is not how a businessman is supposed to do. The customer is a king, and that should be respected in this country.
Okay, Mr. Ajero, we do appreciate your perspectives. So I have to thank both of you, Joe Ajero, Vice President of Nigeria Labour Congress and the General Secretary, National Union of Electricity Employees, as well as Mr. George Itomi, Director with Eco Disco and a legal practitioner. Thank you both for talking to us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Let's take a look at some of the response coming through from you about the electricity tariff subject matter, which we discussed on in the early hours. Well, we've got this one from Eric, says, we need clarification on the electricity tariff hike. My monthly bill went from 2,000 naira to 4,200 naira in November. I consume just 8 hours of electricity in 2 days. Are they saying they will hike the tariff further?
That's besides someone who said he spent 100,000 naira between about 2 weeks or thereabout. This one is from Abasianam, who says, my parents' house in Ikorodu, Lagos, has not been metered by Ikeja Electric. They usually get a non-cost reflective bill of between 8 and 12,000 naira. But since September, it lived to between 18 and 20,000 naira. It's the same with everyone in the estate.
Mayawa says, the increase in electricity tariff is cost reflective and inflationary based. I think NERC should focus more on metering their consumers and improve on electricity generation and distribution.
For Christopher, talking about this electricity hike controversy, when will NERC ever join consumers to protest shortage of power supply?
Well, this one is from Edwin. He says, the law said that there will be review twice a year and the major review once in 5 years. Did the law say it must be upward review? So, because fertilizer were imported to cultivate cassava in Nigeria, Gary should now be sold to Nigerians in dollars?
Very, very good question there.
I mean, these are some of the, you can imagine the challenges people face about all of these issues. So
it happens every time, and it's really, really painful.